Hey guys, I recently put up a post asking if anybody would like to see a video on how to incorporate SQL into Excel, basically use Excel like a database with linking and everything. And so far I've gotten a positive result. All right, only 6 votes, but there's a few people that like to see it. I did a post here where I showed with really only a few lines of code here, you can link up sheets in Excel to behave like a database, and so I'll walk you through that now. Here I have my example. If you just want to look at the code really quick, if you already have a kind of an understanding of VBA in Excel, you can just take a look at this or look at the LinkedIn post. But we'll walk through it again now just to get an idea here. So I'm going to create a new workbook. And immediately I'm going to save it. So I'll just call this SQL Excel. And because we're going to add code to it, we can't save it as an XLSX. We've got to save it either as an XLSB, an XLS binary, or an XLSM, XLS macro. So I will click more options here. We'll save it in documents, and it says Excel workbook, we'll just change that to Excel binary workbook. And so that will enable code. And let me hide this down here, save. Okay. All right, so let's imagine that we have some data here on sheet 1. We'll just put in, let's say, ID and name. And let's say we've got a few names: Eddie, Joe, John, Mary, Pasquale, and then each of them have an ID. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Let's also create another sheet here, and we'll do the same thing. We'll have an ID, and then let's say we'll have their items, value of items sold. So I'll say just say value or amount. And let's say ID number 1 sold 100. And ID 1 would be me, Eddie. Let's say I also sold 200 on another item. Let's say person number 2 sold 500. Person number 3 sold $1,000 worth of a certain item. Let's say they also sold 2,000 of another item and 4,000 of another item. ID number 4 only sold $5 worth of something. ID number 5 sold 200, and ID number 2 sold, let's say, $345. All right, so this is a small example, but it's relevant when it comes to SQL. Normally, summing up this data via 2 sheets, you can do it on the front end with functions, and it's not too difficult. But if there was massive amounts of data and you wanted to sum it up quickly, you could do it with SQL. So let's create a 3rd sheet here, and we'll just call this our output sheet. And let's say we only want the name and the total sales. What we want to do is we want to look up unique names and a sum of all their respective sales. All right, so to do this using SQL, we'll go into our Visual Basic editor, our IDE, and this is the code. So we're basically I'll walk you through how to implement this code, because there is some setup here. So for this new project, we're going to create a new module, and I typically like to name everything, as most people know who watch my videos, so I'll just call this mod ADO, ADO standing for ActiveX Database Objects. So I'm going to use what's called an early bound library for ADO. You can use late bound, and that's usually recommended because then you don't have to worry about the version. It will automatically adjust to whatever version that a person who's running it is on. So we're gonna install the ActiveX database objects library 6.0, or I think there was 6.1. I think it's up here because it's in my other project. All right. And so what's great about early binding is that you get, the IntelliSense, so that when you type an object, you get all of its methods, properties, events, methods, all that stuff. So we're going to do that in this instance. And then, we can also late bind it, which is great if you're going to distribute the project. But with Microsoft object or Microsoft projects, usually early binding is safe just because you know that the drivers are typically going to be installed on everybody within your organization's computers. Typically they're somewhat similar builds. All right, so I'm going to click here. I'm going to click OK. So we have our early bounds reference to ADO. I'm going to create a public subroutine called, we'll just call it SQL in this instance. We want to create a connection string or a connection variable, so we'll call it CN, and we'll make that a new ADO DB, so ActiveX database object database connection. And then we want to instantiate that connection. So what we can do is we can say connection open. Now we need the connection string, and so now I will introduce everyone to a great site. Anybody who does any kind of software development knows about the site connection strings. And this site will give you all the connection strings you need for every type of connection. And we're looking for an Excel connection because we're going to be doing SQL from within Excel, so this is going to be an Excel connection. And we want this Microsoft ACE OLADB 12.0 driver. I think the predecessor was this one, the JET, but this is the one that I think from 2010 or 2013 onward that you can use. And we're going to look for the driver that we need. All right, so this one is 1997 to 2003. That one will work. Yeah, that one will work. Actually, they'll all work. Just want to make sure I'm getting the latest driver. Yeah, oh, that's strange. I didn't think it would work with like such an old version of Excel, but that's cool. All right, so we're just gonna use this provider right here. This one will work. So basically it's asking the provider for the database, and it's this Microsoft ACE OLADB, which is natively installed, where your data source is. So this is going to be the file itself. So we're going to change this to this workbook.fullname so that we natively get the full path. Extended properties is Excel 12.0 XML. When you zip any Microsoft document, workbook or Word document or PowerPoint presentation, they all turn into basically open XML docs, which you can interrogate, and I imagine that's what this indicates. And then HDR indicates whether or not you want a header. So we do have headers in ours, so we're going to leave that as yes. If we didn't have headers, or we wanted to leave out the headers, we could do no. This IMEX is another important thing, because what you'll notice is if your columns do not have similar data types, Excel will try to assume what the data type is, and I think it does that based on the few the first few records that it gets. So if it's just numbers, right, it will assume they're longs or integers. If it's a combination of integers and text, I think it will apply it as like a variant. And so IMEX does come into play every now and then. For our small example here, it doesn't, so we can leave this property out. So I'm just going to copy this one right here. Let's say copy. And then we're going to say open that up. So this just creates a connection here to the Excel file so that we can treat it as a database object. And we're just going to test that really quick. We do have to we just walk through the code. Now we also have to change the data source here. So before we walk through the code, let's just change the data source. We're just going to say this workbook full name, and so instead of explicitly hard coding a path, we know we're just looking at this document, so we're just interrogating this workbook native object and getting the full name property, and it will always give us the name of our workbook, and that's what we need here. So we'll just test this real quick. We'll walk through. I'm pressing F8 on my keyboard to step into the code. All right, so it opened up the connection, no problem, so we're good. All right, now the next thing we want to do is we want to create a record set from this object, and so we're going to dimension a variable as a record set, so we'll just call it RS for record, short for record set. And we can just type record set here because we have a connection to the ADODB library. So I am going to just show you here. You could also do ADODB.record set. That would also be acceptable. All right, so now we want to, just interrogate some of these objects, make sure that it works. So I'm going to say set my record set equal to connection execute. So this is where we can execute SQL against our native workbook. And we'll just start simple. We'll just say select everything from sheet 1. And when you're coding in SQL, the sheet 1 object refers to the front facing name of the sheet, not the programmatic name of the sheet. So, if this was called like sheet main, that's irrelevant. So that the programmatic name of the sheet does not matter. It's the front forward facing name of the sheet. So here we're just going to say copy everything from sheet 1, and let's just put the output on our output sheet. So we know sheet 3 is our output sheet, and we're going to say range A2 and copy from record set, and copy this record set in, and let's just see if we get data. All right, so we get the connection. We run we execute our SQL commands against sheet 1, and then we put the output in sheet 3, our output sheet. Now we should see some output there. There's our SQL Excel. There's our output. All right, we got it. We got the name, the ID, and the name of the people. But this is not what we want. We just wanted to test to make sure that we just had a successful connection. So we'll modify our SQL so that we get the name and the total sales. All right, so we have to change our SQL around first. So the first thing I like to do before I start designating what I specifically want to do is just kind of get the connections out of the way, and this is a simple connection. So we're going to say select everything from sheet 1, and we'll do a left join of sheet 2, which is where our sales data is, and we're going to link it on ID. So we'll put in sheet 1 string ID. There's many ways to form these connections. I like to do it the safe way with the brackets. If your sheet front forward name has spaces like this, you can wrap this in apostrophes. I forget if the apostrophe goes in between the $sign or after. I think it's between. But in this instance, we don't have any spaces, so we can leave that blank. We're going to link on sheet 1 ID equal to sheet 2 ID. So obviously, very simple example here, but it shows you how powerful SQL in Excel can be. All right, and what we want is we want only the name from sheet 1. If name is a protected word, but we'll find out real quick. And from sheet 2, we want name, and from sheet 2, I think it was sales. Or amount, maybe. And then we don't want just the amount, because I'll walk you through this, because the amount will iterate all of the items. And we don't want all of them. We want the summation. So like we want Joe summed up. We want Eddie summed up. John summed up. John's got 3 sales. So we don't want the individual amounts. We want the summed amounts. And so we'll just change our SQL around slightly. We'll just say give us the sum of the amount. And now because we're doing aggregates here, we have to do a group. So we'll just say, let me clean this up a little bit here. We'll continue on to the next line. And we'll say group by, and we're grouping by the name. So we'll just, just like you do with normal SQL, we'll just say group by. Oops. Now, if we walk through our code, we should get our all the names and grouped by all of the summation of the sales that they made. Looks like Mary only made $5. Yeah, that's correct. All right, so that's an example of how to do some SQL in Excel.